maybe Raman, I can start with you. One thing that is becoming more and more critical is that if you just dive headlong into agentic without a proper thoughtful strategy, that seems to be counterintuitive. I know you have had some success thinking about this. Would you want to talk about that, please?
So I would say that the most important area is to completely look at what's your AI or agentic AI or automation strategy totally aligned to the business strategy, which of course today changes very fast. It could be quarterly, it could be monthly, but make sure you're always aligned and get into the depth of your business processes and workflows at all times and have clear KPIs and maintain the focus. It sounds simple, but doing it on the ground takes a lot of effort and alignment and having the executive committee completely aligned. Once you create that, there is a natural pull and you don't get swayed by day to day or whatever is the excitement or development. Identify the KPIs, have the strategy, and look at wins. For example, for us, focusing on the sales process, the sales automation relentlessly has kind of helped because revenue numbers are always exciting, right? More than operations or other areas which become more difficult, to track. So get some successes and align it to your core strategy and get the right set of people onto it. Then becomes project selection, ROI tracking, the cost, so on and so forth. There might be some surprises, but you can just remain focused on that one goal.
Thank you for that. So, on the topic of ROI, I know Geetha, you've had some thoughts about this. If you could talk about maybe a client pattern or an example from the Indian context where you were able to do exactly what Raman was talking about. So, walk us through the process. What went on? What went right? What went wrong? How did you measure ROI? So, if you could talk a little bit about that.
I think ROI, when we talk about it, right, let's take examples. All of us are engineers, and many of us get day to day tasks. And when we get day to day tasks, it becomes a question of if I use a particular technology or a tool, what is that I'm going to get out of it? Now, the same question happens at an enterprise level also. And it varies. Everything is a dimension of time and space comes into picture. What works in western part of the country may not work in India. So I'll take an example. So let's say you're talking in an insurance industry where they're talking about a use case of I want to do an Insta insurance policy issuance. And all of us know it's reality today, right? Some of you might can go to any of the portals, get an insurance instantly. But let's look at what is the straight through processing percentage. Is it happening for all the customers? Definitely not. What is the industry average? Anybody who knows what is the industry average for insurance straight through processing? It kind of ranges 40 to 60%. Some are here, some are there. What is the North Star? I want to go 100%. Will that North Star be possible? Possibly yes, but how much money you throw at it, right? Now, when you kind of break down that particular North Star or the intention into critical steps to make it happen, that's where the ROI becomes important. There are cases where people may say, I'm going to work in India region, and if it's about people and processes and AI, what is my return on investment? But the game that I've learned as I did this for multiple customers is it's not just about money. There is a lot in terms of customer satisfaction, turnaround time. More importantly, your competitive differentiator in the market because of which you will do it. So there are multiple dimensions and everything, I see it in two ways. Dimension of space and dimension of time.
So, Srinivas, maybe for you, talk a little bit about, given what we just discussed, a proper agentic workflow that you have seen, which is it's not just the agent is suggesting something and you have a human in the loop, but maybe where you've gone the whole 9 yards, and walk us through that journey. So, what worked? What checkpoints do you have in place? What did you feel? Giving up control from human to non-human. If you could walk us through these.
Good news is, so far, for anything serious, that's not happened. Okay. Most of the work in Agentic for us is happening in the IT and developer productivity space. So of course, we do have in payments and risk and compliance, KYC is a big one. But a lot of action is happening in the developer productivity. It started with saying, can we do end-to-end from requirements till deployment? Again, we forget that there's a lot of engineering required. Even if you can generate code, that code is more or less disposable. Yeah? Unless it's a small application, new application. If you want to build on something which has been there before, or even if it's a substantially complicated application, the generated code needs fair amount of engineering before. Where we have seen this successful is in, let's say, vulnerability identification and remediation. So you can give it a lot of legacy code. One agent will understand the code, another agent will understand the vulnerabilities. The fourth agent can actually give the fixes, and then the fifth will actually do the fix. And then we are also saying, is there a testing agent which will look at the string of all of these, can validate that. But we have placed a supervisor at every step. If you have identified vulnerabilities, how correct is it? Or is it a false positive or a false negative, right?
So when you say supervisor, human supervisor?
Human supervisors, right? There's a thought process that this review supervision, can it be automated? Then the question comes on observability and explainability, right? That's one. Second big experiment that are happening, advanced POCs, is in this so-called legacy modernization, right? There are two approaches to that. Look at the code, bring out the explanation of what the code is doing, take that explanation, generate use cases, user stories if you want, code, test cases, DevOps automation and things like that. And then you can add in a little bit on reliability and security aspects of that.
Let's take coding as an example. That's come a long way from enablers like Microsoft. Talk a little bit about that journey and what you see that going forward.
Let us think about this, right? We have, let's say, like Geetha mentioned, there's an example of I want to build a customer application that can do ABCD with XYZ constraints, and this is the user experience and the outcome we want, right? Now, if you look at the whole process, the first thing that we do is we got a bunch of people together in the room, we do a bit of brainstorming, and we realize that this is my SRS document. We might probably, go with maybe a MVP approach in the beginning, because you can't do the whole bells and whistles in day one because it's going to cost a lot of money. And we also have a fear of failure, because if I build something and put it out there, the users don't like it, then I have to come back all over again. So I would probably take an incremental approach, right? Now, think about the same thing in the realm of, phase 4 of Agentic AI, where we have multi-agent orchestration, where we could have agents doing the job from the brainstorming onwards. And we'd still do brainstorming, we'd still do that part of it, but we can brainstorm to say, I want to build 4 applications, 4 completely different outcomes with 4 different applications to meet one single customer requirement. It doesn't cost me anything. Agent can build those 4. Agent can put that into production. And I can now look at real-time telemetry on all those 4 scenarios, get a bunch of customers for ABCD testing. And within a couple of days, we have a good idea on which of this works, right? So the hunch work and guesswork is getting out of the picture. Now, what stops us from doing this at infinite scale? Practically nothing, because the token cost is coming down. It's probably a fraction of what it was. Compute cost is anyway never anything. So the ability of the enterprise to kind of, I would say, push the envelope on doing something that was probably not feasible earlier is getting almost there, right?
So I'll come back to Raman, yourself, what you mentioned. Listening to this, there is also this tendency, going back to your point about strategy, that let's use AI for everything. Okay. Now, I come across examples where a very simple, even a simple machine or Microsoft Excel will be perfect, but people are like, no, we have to have checked the AI box. So I know in sales automation, you've talked a little bit about that. So if you could dive into that and specifically talk about what steps you see closest to, is there a method to the madness? How should people think about, well, how do I prioritize? I have a workflow. I know, I can probably throw AI at everything, but is there a way in which I can stage gate it or prioritize it? What's your experience?
So I would say if I take the example of sales automation and to the basic approach of how do I prioritize, which is so important. So I would say take an end-to-end view of the entire sales automation process as applicable to obviously your organization. We spent quite a few weeks doing that, right? And even discovered certain areas which we thought we knew, but actually we didn't know. And I would say start with literally the leads. How do you create leads? How do you nurture them? How do you enrich them? How do you convert them? And right up to your own internal contracting process and order management process and of course fulfillment process, whatever those might be. And get into the depth of each of those. Of course, everyone would have a dozen workflows, catering to this, and bucketize into what can simply be revamped and refixed, which is like a medium kind of effort. What you need to completely reinvent end to end, right? What you need to really look at it. And sometimes when you get down on paper and you start developing, then you start realizing, right? So what is required here is a openness to accept, right? And that is where, call it change management, call it stakeholder alignment, all the softer things becomes important. And if they see the prize at the end, which is about revenue, which is our everyone is aligned to, so I would say that's the way to prioritize. It could be different for different people, but for us, the lead conversion worked when we looked at the entire thing, the effort versus the result, the impact, and we were largely on track. Of course, we had some wrong estimations about effort in some cases. So overall, it was net positive.
Do you also, especially in regulated sectors, do you see certain metrics, certain KPIs being the importance of being observability or audit trail, having all that is more important than others? How would you advise?
So as we see this, right, if you look at our traditional programming methods, as I was telling with my first example, we can get tempted to go towards what I call as deterministic approach. If a problem is given to us, we would like to define do A, B, C, D, E, F in order to solve the problem, because that's the engineering mindset. Now with agents coming in, that is changing to a goal-driven approach, which means just tell me what the agent should do and leave it there. Agent will figure it out. Now how will the agent figure this out? It is going to LLM or LRM and saying, I have this problem in hand, tell me how I solve it. Now, what is the output? The output can be in any number of combinations. Can you control it? To what extent you control it, and therefore what you monitor becomes very, very essential. In a traditional deterministic approach, you have specified inputs, therefore specified outputs, and a validation that is happening to it. In a non-deterministic approach, also we try to do the same thing, where you throw some examples of input-output and see if it is validated. But what becomes important is, what is its ability to explain how it came to a particular list of tasks, or how it broke down a particular goal into tasks. And can you validate that approach? Because more often, what is your control point? Your control point is pretty much LLM, but how much can you control it? The controllability is also fairly small, because you can augment it with more knowledge. You can kind of, refine or retune and kind of make it work. But that's where the non-deterministic part takes over in terms of observability. So the key is how close it's going to the role and the goal that you are asking it to do, and how well it is handling your long tail problem for you are addressing it. Now, is there one tool and technology that can do it today? No. Are there approaches to do it? Yes. Now that becomes multiple experimentation you do to see how it works, and then you go from there.
One thing people fear a lot is, well, if I give my data to an AI, it is going to be used for training, etc. So I'm using that as an example. But talk about the fear that people have when using AI, it is beyond just the obvious stated things. There is more.
I think when I look at customer adoption, I would probably think there are three things that I see as something holding customers back. One is the regulation around that is not very clear, right? So a lot of customers are in regulated industries like banking, healthcare, financial services. So except for very few countries, there is no clear black and white on what could go into a cloud LLM, what could not, right? So it is left to some sort of a gray area. We find a challenge both in the developed markets as well as the growing markets as well. So that is one of the clear challenges because whether we can put a lot of data DPR regulations, but at the end of the day, the LLM is not a resident in your tenant, right? The LLM is sitting elsewhere. The second inhibitor I find is more about there's a lot of notion about 80% of AI projects fail or X number of projects fail. So that keeps a lot of customers at the curb, right? Because what they hear is a lot of noise around that did not work for X, this did not work for Y. So that kind of becomes a challenge. Now, the answer that I kind of always tell myself and my customers is what differentiates a very successful customer project and somebody who's just on the fence is what process they went through when they choose that particular use case. Is it being driven based on priority? Is it being driven based on impact? Is it being driven based on purpose or motivation? If you're just trying to put an AI project for the sake of it, you probably end up somewhere else, right? So the second point is about that particular aspect of getting the not the right value or the perceived lack of right value. Third is to some extent cost does come in, because while we look at the token cost coming down, you just go and build an application which has got millions of tokens going back and forth, it is definitely going to hit you.
Thank you. We're just at the edge of time.